week 7 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few wide receivers. I would start this week. The first guy's Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. Pretty much, he's a guy you start each and every week, no matter what the matchup, no matter what it is. Jamar Chase this season, a monster year in his rookie year, and he's one of the best wide receivers already in fantasy football this season. So the last few games for Chase, week 5 versus Green Bay, 6 catches, 159 receiving yards, and a touchdown on 10 targets. And week 6 at Detroit, 4 catches, 97 yards on 6 targets. So right here, week 7, I know he's got a tough matchup at the Baltimore Ravens. I give up the 5th least amount of fantasy points to wide receivers. But the way this ball game's going to go, in my opinion, is the Ravens, they're going to get off to an early lead. And this Cincinnati Bengal offense with Joe Burrow and Chase, they're going to just go down the field and keep throwing the football a whole lot, in my opinion. And Chase, he's a deep threat. Not many corners could cover him this season. And this guy, him and Burrow have the great rapport, no doubt about it, after playing at LSU with each other and carrying it on here to the NFL. So right here, he's a must-start each and every week, and obviously this week. The next wide receiver is Henry Ruggs of the Las Vegas Raiders. So Henry Ruggs, he's been pretty solid so far this season in his second year after a disappointing rookie season here. And Ruggs, he's the big deep ball threat for Derek Carr and this Raider offense. So the last few games here for Ruggs, week 4 at the Chargers, 3 catches, 60 yards. Week 5 versus the Bears, 3 catches, 51 yards. And week 6 at the Denver Broncos, 3 catches, 97 yards, and a touchdown. So it only takes one big hit down the field on a deep ball for Ruggs and Carr, for Ruggs to have a big fantasy day. And right here, week 7 versus Philly, I think he could get behind that secondary and get a 60 or 70-yard touchdown. And I know Philly only gives up the 3rd least amount of fantasy points to wide receivers, but a lot of teams get in the red zone and a lot of teams score on this Eagle team this season. So I think Ruggs in this one gets behind that secondary, like I mentioned, and he finds the end zone once again. And with a lot of people on bye this week, top receivers as well, he's definitely a play I would plug and play at my wide receiver or flex position. The next wide receiver I would start this week's A.J. Green of the Arizona Cardinals. So A.J. Green, he's had a rebirth this season with his new team, and he's definitely on the fantasy radar. After the last couple seasons, he was banged up and pretty much, in my opinion, didn't want to play with the Cincinnati Bengals. But the last 3 out of 4 fantasy days here for A.J. Green, he's had double-digit fantasy points. Week 4 at the Rams, 5 catches, 67 yards, and a touchdown. Week 5 versus San Francisco, an off game, 1 catch, 13 yards. And then week 6 at the Browns, 5 catches, 79 yards, and a touchdown. So right here in week 7, a great matchup for A.J. Green and the Arizona Cardinals versus the Houston Texans that pretty much can't stop anybody on offense. So A.J. Green in this ball game, I think he finds the end zone. And obviously over there in Arizona, the coverage rolls to DeAndre Hopkins. So A.J. Green and Christian Kirk, for the most part, they have single coverage the whole ball game. And that's where A.J. Green beats defenses over the top and in the red zone. So I think in this ball game in week 7, he finds the end zone once again. And with all the buys, he's definitely a wide receiver I would start this week. The next wide receiver is DJ Moore of the Carolina Panthers. So DJ Moore, another good season this year with new quarterback Sam Darnold. And he's been pretty solid, even though the last 2 weeks his numbers have obviously dipped down after 3 fantasy games in a row from weeks 2 to 4 with 20 or more fantasy points. Week 5 versus Philly, 5 catches, 42 yards. And week 6 versus Minnesota, 5 catches, 73 yards, and a fumble loss. But he had a whopping 13 targets. And week 7 here at the New York Giants, it's a good matchup. And this Giant defense really don't stop anyone. They give up the 12th most fantasy points to wide receivers. And I think in this ball game, DJ Moore is going to find the end zone. And it wouldn't surprise me to see him even reach 100 yards as well in this one. So right here, him and Sam Darnold have a good connection and a good rapport. And DJ Moore, they use him in a lot of roles in this offense as well, with end arounds, jet sweeps, and things like that. So in this ball game with a great matchup at the Giants, I think he has a good one. And the 5th and final wide receiver I would start this week's Cordarrelle Patterson of the Atlanta Falcons. So obviously Cordarrelle Patterson's more of a running back in his career now at this point, but he's also a wide receiver as well in fantasy football. And Cordarrelle Patterson, he's probably been the best playmaker on this Atlanta Falcon team this season. The last few games for him, week 3 at the Giants, 7 carries, 20 yards, and added 6 catches for 82 yards. Week 4 versus the Washington football team, 5 catches, 82 yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns, with 6 rush attempts for 34 yards. And week 5 versus the Jets, 14 carries, 54 rushing yards, and added 7 catches for 60 yards. So right here, what a season it's been for Cordarrelle Patterson, and he's been one of the best pickups in fantasy football this year. And he's got a great matchup this week, no doubt about it. Week 7 at the Miami Dolphins that give up the 4th most amount of fantasy points to running backs, wide receivers. So I think in this game he's going to find the end zone once again. Here's Patterson, and I think he'll go for 80 total yards as well. So that's a few wide receivers I've looked to start here in week 7 of the fantasy football season.